So hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Groff-Palermo. I'm SuperSGP on Twitter if you want to write nice things about me. If you want to write not nice things about me, that's totally not me. I'm a designer and an artist. I like to make work with tech and about tech. And I was really excited when Dave asked me to give the keynote, actually, because I like to talk about big topics. Like, I totally start doing presentations where like this, where I'm like, it's about Node. And then I just talk about art and society and all those important things. But since it's a keynote, that's what I'm supposed to be doing today. So I'm really excited about that. So basically, I'm talking about love and Node and how the two of them are sort of wrapped up in how and why we engage with hardware and what we've sort of agreed to call the Internet of Things. And we can use them to make prototypes of lovable, relatable objects. As I said before, I say things like Node, and then I just talk to you about feelings and art. But I was totally going to do something different this time and really talk about tech and sort of more detailed work. And then Dave asked me to come do this. So I'll be talking about those in my talk, which is in the garden room, which doesn't actually look like that. It's the room that you're in. But at 3 o'clock, I'll be talking a little bit more about the works that I've made that I'll show you some examples of. And I'll have little prototype robots we can play with, and it'll be really fun. So that's coming up. But for now, big ideas, art. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, I came across this really great feature on digital art in Seattle, which you should all totally read later. I have a big web page with links to everything I'm talking about, so you don't have to try to remember anything at all. And so it was a really great talk, and it had these two really apt quotes that I felt summed up my whole interest in doing internet art and digital art at all. The first one, right, is that if researchers figure out what technology can do, artists reveal how and ask what it's for. And I think that's a really big sort of secondary part of what we're doing, right? And I say art. And basically, art gets recognized as art by people making things and saying as many times as they have to, right? I made this, and it matters. And that's what makes it art. And the awesome thing is that we all have this power to make something and stand up and say, I made this, and it matters, and to keep saying it until people start listening and really recognizing that. And I think it's a really important choice to make in what we make because, we really have the opportunity to determine which of two possible futures we're going to be focusing our energies towards. These are two gifts that I always like to show people, but I think it makes a really big difference. We're sort of looking for the difference between Killbot and Beachbot, right? For some reason, the GIFs aren't playing, so you have to imagine him dancing. It's very excellent. Let's see, is he going to dance now? There you go. Right, and so if we make good choices, I think we can really start working towards a world of Beachbots and not Killbots. And one of the artists who is profiled in that piece I talked to you about, Robert Toomey, he focuses on sort of the imperfections in systems. And he explains it, what's the messy humanity left over on the edges? What does Google know about me, and what will it never know? What cannot be captured by these systems? And I think what can't be captured are sort of the most important things that we choose to express. And one of those things that I think is so hard to express and so worthy to investigate is our relationship with objects, how we can relate to them as buddies and friends, how we can love them and be loved in return. And by doing this, I hope we might also be able to sort of help allay this very zeitgeisty set of anxieties there have been a ton of articles about, right? The anxieties about the relationships that we're going to have with machines in the coming decade. And so I sort of became interested in this whole question space at the School for Poetic Computation. And it's a program in New York. It's 10 weeks, focused on the intersection of art and tech. And students spend, their time creating new works and considering the effects of the pieces that they're making. One of the founders calls art the R&D lab for humanity, and that's really the sort of enlivening spirit of the place. And as you can imagine, in such a place, we spend a lot of time talking about big questions. Things like utopia, its favorite little sister, dystopia, and particularly the dystopia that is the Internet of Things. And the argument here goes something like, if, as of September 2014, there was $1.4 billion in venture capital funding being directed just at wearables and biosensing, if by 2018 there's going to be 60 million fitness trackers in use worldwide, if the future of connected objects basically looks like a long list of ways to spy on ourselves, our homes, our children, are we in fact giving away all of our privacy, willingly and less so, in a headlong rush into this dystopia where governments and corporations attempt to control our very selves? And it's not just social theorists and foofy artists who are asking these questions. A recent report from Pew Research, which canvassed experts in computing and machine intelligence, highlighted a number of the same things. The Internet of Things and wearable computing are going to progress significantly in the next 10 years. The realities of this data-drenched world raise substantial concerns about privacy and people's abilities to change their own lives. The level of profiling and targeting will grow and amplify social, economic, and political struggles. And somewhat of a corollary, right? Individuals and organizations' responses to the Internet of Things will recast the relationships people have with each other and groups of all kinds. And so if 1 in 6 are inevitable, if we're rushing headlong towards this and it's going to change the way that we relate, what can we do about number 2 to not just sort of reify what's going on right now? And I have a theory about this, because of course I do. And my theory is that the problem in this realm is that our abilities have almost come to outstretch our imaginations. We can create sensors and we can connect them to the internet and to each other, and then we can do what, right? We're like, oh my God, I can do all this stuff, but what am I doing it for? And I sometimes suspect that we take what can be monitored because that's what we can see. So what if we could start imagining something different? And fortunately, at SFPC, I was introduced to 2 other sources of ideas, a real woman and a fictional one, Sarah Hendren and Helva. So Sarah Hendren is an artist who's amazing and does a lot of work on assistive technologies and on prosthetics. And part of her work, and part of what she presented to us at SFPC, was about questioning what assistive technology actually means. I mean, all tech is assistive. My glasses are assistive. Our phones are assistive. We make objects to satisfy desires, and we make objects that allow people to affect and be affected by the world as they want. That's what we make, and that's what we do. And I wondered, about creating assistive technology for these objects alone. What if we could let them speak for themselves? And so Anne McCaffrey's Ship Who Sang, which is where Helva comes from, sort of has one type of answer. It's a series of stories that features a human who is turned into the brain for a spaceship. Sometimes in the future, people born with physical disabilities are bound up into titanium shells, physically augmented, and then taught to be a sort of machine-human hybrid with reduced emotions, but still human flexibility and subtlety. And I mean, that is definitely a little bit dystopic in and of itself, binding people into these titanium shells. And the stories tell about her journeys through the universe, and most important and most interesting to me, her relationships with the various humans who serve as her partners on the ship. And it made me sort of wonder, what if the most pertinent image is of an intelligent object that's also almost human? What if something like this was our goal? What if objects could be loyal? That might help with the cluster that's current security practice, right? Like maybe it's less about passwords and more about asking about creating loyalty. What if we could understand the life cycles of things that we own? What if the Internet of Things could be more than a monitoring network and be an assistive technology for those objects? What if we investigated how we relate to them? Could this, in its own way, counter some of the fears and anxieties by letting us imagine something better that we are capable of making? And fortunately, I was reading this other book, Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, and he basically argues that unless we teach machine intelligence to have values, there's going to be eventual doomsday AI takeover. So, by asking these questions, we might actually be saving the world. And so, with that big thing, here's my little answer to saving the world. Relatables. So when I say relatables, what I'm talking about are objects that, let us explore these relationships with machines or allow objects to speak. And a secondary correlation to that is I would define them as objects that move away from using information to either report on our activities or to motivate us to change our behaviors, which is most of what we have right now. So moving away from information that should be acted on can be really hard to conceive of, even when you start planning it out. So take the idea of the canonical connected milk carton, right? Right now, the idea is your fridge is going to tell you when it's empty or too old, and the fridge would order it, the milk carton might replenish itself, and this is very much what people seem to be working towards. But what if instead of making it about the data. We asked our milk carton to tell us about the cows, to tell us about where it came from, to tell us its story, and turn it into a means of communication. That's a really fertile field to start looking in. And yet, at the same time, it's so easy, right, to turn that into, oh, well, then we'll tell them if the cows are happy cows or sad cows and make sure people are only buying milk from, like, good, happy cows. And so instantly, you're trying to turn it into people's behavior. But I think it's really worth it to keep it pure and start finding out what happens when we talk about the objects themselves. And some work about objects speaking for themselves have already been done. This is Blendy from 2004, which is a blender that is operated. If you speak to the blender expects to be spoken to. And I have no sound, so now you can't hear her growling. Oh, there you go. So, these are the kinds of things we do when we start asking what objects might want from us. And that's super awesome, but now we're going to talk about worry again, and anxiety, and terrible, sad things. When we look at all these anxiety-driven articles, I start to wonder if we're engaging in this doomsday thinking as a reflex rather than as a response. And French philosopher Bruno Latour recently suggested that the myth of Frankenstein has led us all astray in the way that we deal with technological change. His sin was not his hubris to create life, but rather his fright that led him to abandon rather than care for his creation was where, Frankenstein failed. So if we create relatables, I'm hoping we can create a situation where instead of running away from our monsters, we can love them. We can feel responsible for them, and perhaps even address the deep anxieties that we might be provoking. So the anxieties that I like to talk about can be categorized into three big groups. The first one is what we'd call sort of technophobia, or lack of understanding. For a lot of people, the issue of relying on technical structures they don't understand is a really deep concern. And you wind up with articles like where this image is from, where Ian Bogost is calling tech a new theology, where algorithms are embedded everywhere and indistinguishable from God. And this very much comes out of things feeling unapproachable, unapprehensible. But we're lucky, because neuroscience has shown, right, that similar brain regions are involved when we think about the behavior of humans and sort of non-human entities that we've anthropomorphized, which is to say that by encouraging people to see machines as human-like, as something we can converse with, like Blendy, we might actually be encouraging them to start trying to understand and think about those objects in a familiar way. And this sounds awesome, but there's always criticism. And in this case, the criticism of the approach comes from people like Sherry Turkle, who has actually been researching AI and human-computer interactions since the 70s. And she was originally a robo-optimist, I would call her, but she's come to object to some of the promises of anthropomorphism, outlining what I classify as the second anxiety, and that's the worry of sort of undeliverable promises of this illusionistic humanity. She says, soon we'll be looking at robots designed to care for children and the elderly, to serve as companions for all types of people. But she worries that robots who want to be buddies are sort of implicitly promising an emotional connection they can never deliver. And she illustrates this with a story from the MIT Media Lab. They were working on robots, and they had children interacting with these robots as part of a study, and the robot malfunctioned. And the child that was working with the robot at the time was convinced that the robot hated this child, right? She wouldn't talk to anyone anymore and just went and ate snacks and was pouting because she's like, well, the robot works for everyone else and not me, so it doesn't like me. And that's somewhat of the dark side of a really straightforward anthropomorphism, where we give people too much illusion and it doesn't work the way that we hoped. However, this sort of contrasts with other movements we're seeing now with companies like Lively and Glow, where they're sort of using promises of connecting you to other people almost as a way to smooth over some of the creepy data mining they're doing. Lively basically convinces your grandparents to let your parents spy on them. And it does this by curating these nice little packages of pictures and notes from their grandchildren to make it seem really great. You totally want to use this because your grandchildren will write you letters. But, it's sort of using this sense of loneliness to convince people to give you their data. And to some extent, I then wonder, are relatable robots worse than letting people's loneliness and fear fester until they accept being surveilled? And that's sort of the third ultimate anxiety afloat in these discussions, right? And that is sort of the fear of corporate overreach or willingly delivering ourselves into wickedness, I think is the way somebody put it. And in Ai Weiwei is Living in Our Future, the great article by Hans de Zwart, I think he's Dutch, catalogs how quickly products move from surveillance into control, of our pets, of our children. There's this app, apparently, that if you ignore your parents' phone calls, they can lock your phone remotely until you call them back. And, because we don't want kids to have all the fun, we can also surveil ourselves. This awesome wristband, you can set it up to shock you when you're doing things you don't like. But obviously in all of these products, we're like using data as a proxy method for relating to ourselves, our homes, our babies, our worlds. And so again, why not focus on trying to understand these relationships themselves? Why not work on prototypes that maybe have liveliness, but less humanness? And maybe we can let objects speak like objects, and in doing so, create the imaginative course we need. We could make the world as described by the cyber-feminists of the 90s, where the question is not one of dominance and control or of submission and surrender to machines, and instead make it one of exploring alliances, affinities, and co-evolutionary possibilities. And that might sound kind of nuts, right? But we already know exactly what it's like to live with these enchanted objects that we're desperately in love with. One author, Derek Mead, in a paean to his phone, writes, "We've all seen the regular stream of surveys finding that say most Americans would rather go a day without coffee or liquor than their phones." Or that old standby that some 33% of Americans would rather have their phones than sex. And I'm not judging. I think it is amazing that we are capable of so much tenderness and feeling for glass and silicon and aluminum. That's amazing. Humans are fucking awesome. And so what if we started with something basic and worked up to allowing objects to be as well-spoken as Blendy and as well-loved as our phones? So I just have a couple more slides for you guys. Examples. I really like examples. So I've brought a couple little weirdo robots to show at my talk, and they're prototypes. And I think it's really important to underscore thinking in terms of prototypes, because these are objects of questions and not of answers. We don't know what kinds of relationships are going to be the best or the most compelling. We don't know which ones are going to benefit us the most. So just testing out little things and seeing what happens, I think, is really key and really fun. So this is one of the guys I've brought. He's Don't Touch the Friend Bot. And his key mode of interaction is response. When you're too far away, he tries to get your attention. When you get too close, he freaks out a little bit. So it's a question of just playing with response to people. The next is the neo-neglect, which is based on a previous work I did, The Timeline of Neglect, which is a web-based visualization all about ignoring my books. I decided to bring it into real life. And so what it does is it sort of amplifies the voices of books that I've bought and then ignored. You close a little copper switch when you get them, and the lights change color and eventually die off when the book itself isn't removed from the shelf. And there's also Spiny, which is an assistive device for cranky folks. Sometimes you go to work and you really don't want anybody to talk to you, but how are they going to know, right, that you're having a grouchy morning? So instead, from the web, you can set Cranky to let people know how you're feeling and put it up on the desk. And it can express its own feelings too, right? In this case, it's driven by a human clicking on something, but you could hook it up to some other object that wants to express its feelings. And then just recently, I did a piece called Deluge, which is sort of hard to take a picture of, so I showed you guys some wires in case you were wondering what those looked like. And Deluge uses a Bluetooth sensor to see how many people are around, and somewhat similar to FriendBot to respond to being overwhelmed. This was a piece for Art Hack Day that was in New York last Friday, where people did things based on the concept of Deluge. So this is my little Deluge buddy. Anyway. So obviously, I think this has been a sort of whirlwind tour across a really fecund and exciting place. And I think we can come up with so many crazy interactions and prototypes that are so much better than mine, and I hope all of you guys like think about things you might want to work on, and if creating some weird object maybe seems 2 steps too far, you know, one of the things I will be talking about in my session is sort of how you can use your current JavaScript knowledge to leverage making sort of little objects like this. So maybe you don't know what you want to make, but there's always lots of libraries. You know, there's Johnny 5, there's the Tesla libraries. There's a lot of people doing great JavaScript work that you could even think about contributing to as you work up your courage to make, you know, a weird prototype like I did. So if you guys remember 310 here in the garden room, come see me and we'll talk about more robots in detail and it'll be great. So thank you guys so much.